With just a handful of games left in the NBA regular season, are the Denver Nuggets in danger of tumbling down the Western Conference standings? Should the Colorado Avalanche bring Gabe Landeskog back for the upcoming postseason if he's healthy enough to play? And yes, we will have another guest to help us continue our Mile High Milestones countdown, celebrating the 30 biggest storylines in Colorado sports over the last 30 years of Denver Sports 104.3 The Fan's existence. All things to come on today's rundown, but we begin in the NBA, where unfortunately this last Nuggets game felt eerily familiar to the game they had against the Timberwolves, which was, of course, it was a double overtime loss, 140-139, in a game that was record-setting for Nikola Jokic with a 61-point triple-double. But the villain in that story was Russell Westbrook, who in the final seconds of the game missed a layup that he may or may not have needed to take before blowing a defensive assignment in transition and fouling Nickeil Alexander-Walker from beyond the three-point line, allowing him to shoot 2 free throws, sealing a win for the Timberwolves, which was then their 6th straight against the hometown Denver Nuggets. Well, after that game, because of the extended minutes that the Nuggets had to play, going into 2 overtimes, Nikola Jokic checking into the game with 6 minutes left in the second quarter against Minnesota and then never leaving the court again, save for the halftime break. The entire starting lineup was out for the Denver Nuggets against a lowly San Antonio Spurs team who were also without Victor Wembanyama and De'Aaron Fox and the like. So this felt like it was going to be a battle of 2 B squads, for lack of a better or maybe more appropriate term. And the Nuggets fell behind pretty significantly multiple times in the game. Russell Westbrook, who was thrust into the starting lineup despite having played, his fair share of minutes against Minnesota, was hoping, I think, for a redemption story in this San Antonio game. And unfortunately, it ended in very similar fashion. He looked similarly erratic in transition. His shot just did not seem to fall, whether he's falling short and airballing layups or he's bricking mid-range and three-point shots off the back iron. It just didn't feel like he had his stuff. And that's interesting to say about a player who poured in 30 points, but it especially felt like late in that game, whether it was a missed pass to Jalen Pickett or, again, bricking a ill-advised or rushed three-point shot, it felt like, once again, in the closing crunch minutes of a game that, despite the fact they fell behind early, the Nuggets were in pole position to try and win, taking an early lead in the fourth quarter, Russell Westbrook melted down in a handful of moments and cost them the ability to come back in that game. And I asked the question yesterday, do the Denver Nuggets officially have a Russell Westbrook problem? And I think as it relates to their postseason opportunity this season, yes, they do have a Russell Westbrook problem. And this is not unlike the problem that we've seen Russ's last 5 teams that he's played for in the last 5 to 6 years have that exact same problem. There is a clear split in the duality that is Russell Westbrook between what he's able to contribute in the early parts of the regular season and during that regular season, and then on the tail end and into the postseason are 2 very different players. I heard Zach Bai say yesterday on the drive that Russell Westbrook might be the worst decision maker on the entire Denver Nuggets roster. He is a minimum level player who was brought in to be your 6th man off the bench, so it's not fair, I think, to assume that he's going to be at the top of the charts or top marks compared to the players who are paid more and contribute more than him. But that's not a great sign for a team that didn't do a lot in the offseason and didn't do anything at the trade deadline, that one of the more significant moves that you did make to bring in a veteran presence is having that stigma centered around him. I am very curious to see how Michael Malone wants to handle his playoff rotation, how Russ factors in, and whether or not they will run into a similar wall that they've run into in recent postseasons, assuming all is healthy, which as of now we know is not the case. There are definitely legitimate concerns when it comes to Jamal Murray about his health. Aaron Gordon has battled injury in and out for the majority of this season. Michael Porter Jr. stepping away recently for personal and family concerns and things of that nature. All in all, this just does not feel like a Denver Nuggets team that is locked in and clicking and flowing in the right direction with just, I believe, 5 games left before the postseason. And I think the evidence of that is that just 24 hours ago, the Denver Nuggets were a team who were in position to threaten for the NBA's number 2 seed behind the Houston Rockets and significantly behind the Oklahoma City Thunder, who no one in the West is going to be able to catch. And just 24 hours later, the Denver Nuggets find themselves now as a 4 seed in the West, tied with the Los Angeles Lakers, but losing the tiebreaker. And they are not that far off of potentially falling back into the 5th seed. So to see a team who was in contention for number 2, knocking on that door, just one day later with 2 erratic and confusing and frustrating losses, now potentially be sliding into a 5 seed, that is something that for me raises some concern, and I don't love the vibe or the energy around that team right now. The other team that calls Ball Arena home is the Colorado Avalanche, and they narrowly escaped what would have been an upsetting and unfortunate loss to a lowly Chicago Blackhawks team, being down 2 goals in the 3rd period, tying it up, and eventually winning the game in shootout, which thus far this season has been a house of horrors for them. If they are not able to win in regulation or in the first overtime period, the shootout has not been kind to the Colorado Avalanche. It was kind enough last night, thanks to Arturi Lehkonen, but it wasn't really anything that came out of that game itself that sparked a lot of intrigue or interest from me. It actually came during the pregame when the NHL on TNT crew interviewed former and now once again current Colorado Avalanche member Erik Johnson. The veteran defenseman was interviewed by the NHL on TNT crew before the game, and he was asked, of course, after a very bland introductory question from Paul Bissonnette, was asked about, of course, Gabe Landeskog and what he thinks about Gabe's efforts to return thus far. And it was a similar sentiment from Erik Johnson where he said, quote, "We're pulling for him, and I think it's a matter of when, not if anymore." And we've seen Gabe skating consistently for the Avalanche in practice over the last couple of weeks. He's been participating in special teams, working with the top power play unit, experimenting with some penalty kill, things that we weren't sure, even if he was going to be able to play in some capacity, that he was going to be included in. Well, he has been included in them, and he's been taking contact more recently in those practices to kind of continue his ramp up. And the concept of when, not if, is ironically mirroring what Gabe himself told us earlier this past year at the BMW Championship, the Pro-Am at Castle Pines that took place before the actual PGA Tour event, where Gabe Landeskog played, and he was interviewed in that moment. And he said the same thing. He said, I'm working toward, for me, it feels like a win, not if. And he gave kind of a range of mid-September to April in terms of a span in which he could return. Now, that's like a 9-month sample size, which is kind of, silly to say that, like, oh, it could happen anytime between this year and next year, basically. And, but here we are on the first week of April with the playoffs just a couple of weeks away, and it would technically fit within Gabe's original timeline that he gave us months and months ago about a potential return. We're now seeing it with our own eyes with the video that's coming out of him skating at practice. He's taking contact. His teammates seem to be speaking about it in a more calm and comfortable way. And it really does start to beg the question, is Gabe Landeskog going to come back for the postseason with the Avalanche this year? They would have the flexibility to do so because of the NHL's long-term injured reserve setup, where they can bring back injured players during the postseason and have them not count against the team's strict salary cap. I think I speak for a lot of Avalanche fans and probably a lot of people in that locker room, including Gabe, when I say that I really hope Landeskog is able to complete this lengthy and arduous recovery process. I do. But, and maybe this is an unpopular take, maybe it's a hot take, that will remain to be seen. I will say that I don't think I want the Colorado Avalanche to bring Gabe Landeskog back in this postseason, even if he is healthy enough to do so. And my reasoning is fairly simple. It is the fact that this Avalanche front office has moved heaven and earth over the course of 9 transactions in this past season to revamp and reform this roster into a potential Stanley Cup contender again. They won the Cup a handful of years ago. They have not been able to replicate that success under the same team model and structure that they did previously. And general manager Chris McFarland and company, I think, made a very bold but respectable move by dealing Mikko Rantanen and breaking up a core member, a perennial 100-point scorer in the NHL, to try and attack this thing a different way, starting with Marty Necas and Jack Drury, and then Ryan Lindgren and Brock Nelson and Charlie Coyle, and revamping the goaltender room, jettisoning Georgiev and Eustace Annunen to bring in Mackenzie Blackwood and Scott Wedgwood. All of these moves were made by an organization that I think recognizes the urgency to try to win a cup. And I think bringing Gabe Landeskog back, especially because the moves that they've made seem to be working, this feels and looks like a reinvigorated, re-energized, and dangerous hockey team. And trying to bring back Gabe Landeskog, which is such an unknown considering he has not played hockey in 3 years in an official capacity, and having to try to work him in on the third line, whether or not he participates in special teams or not, third, fourth line contributions, and potentially working him up from there. It feels like an unnecessary gamble for the Colorado Avalanche to take, knowing how much is at stake and how much effort has been made to try to push the chips into the center of the table for this year. I love Gabe. He is the captain. He is one of the most pivotal figures in franchise history, and he is one of the longest tenured Colorado athletes here in town today. And nothing would make me happier than to see him complete his journey. I just don't know if I want it right now. I think that if he's willing and able and healthy to play in this postseason, there's nothing that says that they can't push this one more postseason, and he can continue to work and continue to skate and do all of those things, and we can pick it up again next year and see where we're at. This Colorado Avalanche team that this front office has pushed all the chips into the center of the table for, I don't want the heartstring and the nostalgia factor of trying to work in a complete unknown at this point, which is what Gabe Landeskog is, have that jeopardize a chance to win a cup in a window that could be closing faster than we realize. All right. It is time to continue our Mile High Milestones countdown presented by your local Ford dealers. We have been counting down 30 of the biggest storylines in Colorado sports over the last 3 decades in celebration of the 30th anniversary of Denver Sports 104.3 The Fan. We are moving swiftly into the top 10. We are at number 7, where one of the more recent milestones has taken place, and that is the trade for former Seahawks quarterback Russell Wilson. And to join me on this walk down memory lane is not just the author of the list itself, but maybe the most staunch Russell Wilson supporter left in the Denver metro area, and that is none other than James Marilat, editor at DenverSports.com. James, you have been unabashed and proud and loud, I would say, in your support and defense of Russell Wilson, even in the year after he has left town. So before we get into that aspect, let's just rewind the clock all the way to the beginning of this, which took place in 2022. And up to this point, when you're looking at the 2022 Denver Broncos, it felt like they were just firmly in this uncomfortable, sweaty, gray middle ground. And they were snake bitten in a sense where, especially at the quarterback position, since Peyton Manning walked out the door, everything they touched, it was the opposite of Midas. Everything they touched eroded.
Yep.
They had tried, they had tried it with Brock Osweiler, bringing him back after he was a hero, during the Super Bowl year in those games he took over for Peyton Manning. They tried it with Trevor Siemian, who was just a couple of picks away from Mr. Irrelevant selling real estate. And they went with Paxton Lynch and Case Keenum and Joe Flacco and Drew Lock and Teddy Bridgewater, and really whatever angle you wanted to throw at the quarterback position, it never worked for him. And I know how I felt on March 8th, 2022, when this trade went down. I was there for the I won't call it infamous because I think it's just famous. This is not a drill moment from our friend Zach By.
Correct.
I remember sitting at the control board in our studio. I was helping produce Zach's show, and the Adam Schefter tweet alert comes across my phone, and it was such a staunch headline that I had to take that quick second to be like, is this a fake tweet? You know, it wasn't April Fool's Day because we're in March still.
Was it a darn Schefter?
Was it? Yeah. Was it a darn Schefter or whatever? Because those things happen. They get you. And it wasn't. And I ran out of that. We were in a commercial break. I ran out of the chair into our program director's office, confirmed it with him, came yelling, running back down the thing with Zach. It was all this hype. It was over, and that was the birth of the genesis of the this is not a drill. Russell Wilson has just been traded to the Denver Broncos. Adam Schefter reporting at 11:22 a.m., March 8th, 2022. If you go back and listen to the whole thing,
so good.
It is gold.
It is
gold.
Radio gold.
To the degree where it's been included in like hype videos, or it was that year when Russ was like loading kind of thing. But anyways, you go back to that point, and to me, I remember saying it out loud, they finally did it. The Denver Broncos, who had been so inept and to a certain degree averse of drafting and developing a franchise quarterback, which they've never actually, in fairness, truly done in their history, because it's tough to count John Elway because of the way it started.
Yep.
And the best example is like Tim Tebow. Or
only Broncos quarterback drafted that's won a playoff game.
Exactly.
Tim Tebow.
So for a franchise that had never successfully drafted and developed a homegrown quarterback, I was like, they finally did it. They have been skirting around this issue for almost a decade, and this time it's going to work. How did you feel on March 8th, 2022, when we revealed it was not a drill?
I remember where I was. I was, because, you got to go back. They'd also tried one other thing. The year before at the draft, it was the Aaron Rodgers rumor.
Yep.
Then they hire Nathaniel Hackett to try and get Aaron Rodgers
in
that
a clear
year.
attempt to bring happen.
That morning, we found out Rodgers was going back to the Packers.
Yeah.
Because I tweeted, George Payton misses again. 2 hours later, he pulls off this deal for Russell Wilson. So everybody's coming at me of like, I guess he had a plan all along, right?
Yeah.
But I was driving somewhere, going to lunch, had to turn around, head back, and, circle the wagons with everybody. And I wrote it in the story. It was we interrupt regularly scheduled program, drop the press or stop the presses. It was that kind of a moment. And the way it all turned out, obviously it was 2 years that didn't go particularly well. He's gone. He's on his second team since he left. People forget just how excited we were when it happened. The press conference the next day, Nathaniel Hackett was giddy. He was like a kid on Christmas Day. All the buildup, all the lead up, every OTA, every player that came out, it was, hey, what's it like to eat in the lunchroom with Russell Wilson? It was Russell Wilson, to the point where I remember sitting in on the drive in July and like, training camp needs to get here. I've got Russell Wilson fatigue. Like, we need to play some football. And this is going to sound like I'm being my normal Russell Wilson apologist, and I'm not.
Okay.
But it was interesting to look back. Like, if a couple of things go differently, he throws for 340 yards in Seattle in the opener.
Yeah, 46 left hash. They lose in heartbreaking fashion.
He's leading them on the drive. And, Javonte Williams gets tackled on a screen pass that should have gone down to the 15-yard line that would have made it a chip shot. You win that game. They beat Houston, but that was the countdown the clock game. They beat the Niners 11-10. That was ugly. Like, they could have very easily been 3-0. And then there's that ugly game against the Colts where he throws 2 bad picks in the fourth quarter. They lose 12-9 in overtime. He misses, I'm blanking on the receiver, wide open on 4th and goal. Mm-hmm. If he hits him, like, who knows how momentum goes?
Was it KJ Hamler?
KJ Hamler.
Because he's banging his helmet?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, it's like a couple of plays, a couple of moments. Momentum's a funny thing. And once it started going bad, it just unraveled. And that team, I mean, they lost they won 1 out of 10 games after the 2-1 start, 3 of them in overtime, but they were 11 points or less in 6 games. Yep. It all came unraveled with the Christmas Day debacle and Hackett gets fired. But man, the way this town was excited when that news happened, to me, it's trade for John Elway. I remember where I was watching the Nuggets play San Antonio that night when that happened. Peyton Manning is signing with the Broncos.
I remember
where
I was for that one.
And this trade. I mean, it was big news, and it was going to change the franchise. And they finally made it happen where they were going to get a franchise quarterback. I mean, Russell Wilson had been to like 9 Pro Bowls at that point. Nobody had won more games in his first 10 years.
Super Bowls, won one. He was the winningest quarterback through the first 100 games of a career in NFL history. He was 100% on a Hall of Fame trajectory. And the national narrative was let Russ cook. It was like, hey, you got to just let Russ be Russ, uncork him within an offense. And man, we ate it up. And if you're looking back, it's funny you talk about look back in hindsight, right? The decision to bring in Nathaniel Hackett was clearly not like 100% transparently an effort to try to lure Aaron Rodgers, who goes in a different direction, and it goes arguably more poorly for him than it did for us.
Yeah.
Then you're kind of left with this bird in the hand sense of like, Nathaniel Hackett's just objectively a horrible head coach.
Yeah.
And it started off cute, just like the Russ stuff did. They were kind of like mirror images of each other in a certain way. Like all the Nathaniel Hackett stuff with the goofy, giddy, it was all cute. We got Russell Wilson, y'all. And he's talking about Sierra. He's like fawning over his starting quarterback's like superstar wife or whatever. And it's glitz and it's glam. And we're like literally breaking down on the radio at that point, like, how quirky and unique his presentations are. And he's got this and that. And then, you get to training camp and Russ is there and Sierra is there. And it's like, this is 1-2 step. This is the pop star. And like, one of the weirdest memories I have from this era that we're talking about is Sierra walking up to me with the entourage and asking me if I can help direct her and the kids to a bathroom at the Broncos facility for the kids. And I'm like, I'm standing in front of it, it's happening. And as I'm walking in front of them, I'm thinking to myself, Sierra's walking right behind me. Like, this is the weird world we lived in. And it just like, it was so jarringly different from how the Broncos had been before that we almost should have had, and maybe some of us did, have that like weird tingle, like something's not right here. Like, this feels like it's not going to like go the way you think it's going to go. And then you mentioned it. It starts with the heartbreaker in Seattle. The Broncos got thrust into so many primetime games. I think they had 5 primetime games, and each one of them seemed to get worse than the rest. That game against the Colts that you referenced, that they lose 12-9 in overtime, which, if I'm not mistaken, Philip Lindsay was on the Colts at that time.
I believe so.
I believe he was, because he had come up from the Seattle Sea Dragons and was coming back. And he actually played in that game because Jonathan Taylor like blew his hamstring out on the first play of the game or something like that. And that game is the only sporting event, not football game, the only sporting event I have ever seen in my entire life where not just one or two or a few scores of hometown fans here in Denver. I was watching the game at Mile High Station. Scores of hometown Denver Broncos fans leaving the arena at the end of regulation. Your team is going into overtime in a game that you theoretically have just as good of a chance of winning, and you don't even want to stay for the end. That's how bad it was. You had the Jimmy Garoppolo 49er game that was ugly, and it just felt like it was going downhill so fast. But to your point, there were moments, you mentioned a couple of things that go a different way. I think of the Washington game where
the Hail Mary
that doesn't land, and the 2-point or the Hail Mary that lands and the 2-point conversion that they don't connect, and all those things. And even though it was bad, it still felt like it was some of the better quarterback play, or at least felt like there was a higher ceiling for quarterback play than they've had. Nathaniel Hackett gets fired. Sean Payton comes in. And then I could feel, to me, I guess I should say, when was the moment that you felt that the way that things happened between Russ and Sean Payton were going to happen? Because for me, it was during his introductory press conference when he got asked that question about quarterbacks having their own office or something. And he was like, yeah, no, I've never heard of that, and we're not going to be doing that.
I knew it was, irreconcilable differences when he yelled at him in Detroit. And that was later in the year of Sean Payton's first year. I was like, this is bad.
Especially when Russ like didn't fight back.
When you do that in front of it's a national TV game, like that was pretty bad. But yeah, it was funny. You talked about that game where people were leaving. It's a Thursday night game, and they were like more interested in being home early to get to school and work than watching the game. That's how bad the product was. And they still almost won it at the gun. And there were a lot of like near misses, right? Like even his last game as a Bronco, the 16-point comeback he had in the fourth quarter against the Patriots,
New England, yeah.
On Christmas Eve, was vintage Russell Wilson, and they just couldn't finish it. Like the magic he had in Seattle was he hits KJ Hamler. He makes the 2-point conversion. They win that Patriots game. Like he got him so close and they couldn't finish the deal. It does make me wonder if they hadn't had Nathaniel Hackett, who was such a disaster. He let Russ do way too much in terms of having the office and running the offense.
And I don't think that was even we said that about VJ with his first stint here, right?
Yeah.
He was in way over his head, and there were other, between Elway and the ownership situation, there were other factors at play that really hampered VJ from being able to do his best job. But VJ went elsewhere, even though it was as a coordinator, and succeeded, and now he's back here, and the narrative feels like it's totally changing. Nathaniel Hackett immediately went to New York under Saleh to be with Rodgers again, and it still was equally a disaster.
Well, if they'd have kept Vic Fangio and Pat Shurmur, believe it or not, and made this trade, I think it works out. I really do.
It's a very butterfly effect.
Russ threw for 6,500 yards, 42 touchdowns, and 19 picks as a Bronco.
Yeah, that's one of those, if you put the blind numbers up, player A, player B, you're
but
like,
the problem is he was 11 and 19.
Yeah.
That's the problem. And, going back to why this is such a big story, it got bad and turned south so quickly because our expectations were so high. We were expecting him to come in here and be Peyton Manning, be John Elway. We kind of forgot Peyton Manning started 2-3 his first year as a Bronco. We forgot, but it's a 10-year vet. He should come in here, fix things immediately. When it didn't happen, Andy's corny, Andy's cheesy, Andy's cringy. Broncos country was over it. So if it didn't work immediately, they were just ready to pounce, and man, it didn't, and it just went downhill in a hurry. But that day, we will forever remember where we were when we heard that news.
Oh.
And it's, this is all a look back at the history of the station. That's one of the most iconic on-air moments.
Yeah.
In the fans' history.
Absolutely. It is. We have it as a sound bite. We play it regularly. It's referenced. That, just like some of the other stuff was referenced in the hype videos for the season of it'd be Zach Beisler is like, this is not a drill, and then it's like Russell Wilson touchdown pass.
He's up like an octave.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It was big. And it didn't turn out great. I do sound like an apologist. My whole thing with Russ is I saw flashes.
Yeah.
And you said it was like some of the best quarterback play we'd seen.
Yeah.
It just was in flashes. It wasn't enough. And I just feel like, man, if they'd have really wanted to make it work, they could have made it work, and they could not have played their hand worse with the head coach and all of it. They played it so poorly. But March 8th, 2022, it's a day that'll go down in Denver sports history. It just will.
Yep. And I was bouncing around an interesting thought this morning that I was kicking around, and I'll ask it to you. Given the way that the Russell Wilson era, the Russell Wilson experiment ended, which ultimately the team decides to take on the largest single dead cap hit in NFL history to move on from Russ, they draft Bo Nix in the first round, and in Bo Nix's rookie season, they go 10-7. They make the wild card, and they lose to Buffalo. And it felt like, really, you didn't have to get to the end of the season for this feeling, at least for me. It felt like the middle of the season after Bo Nix came out of that tough, first 4 games or so, where things really started to pick up, where he went from being one of the worst quarterbacks in the NFL, statistically, to one of the best in the various categories. It felt like Bo Nix and that season almost instantly started to dissolve some of the frustration and the pain that we felt during the end of Russell Wilson's tenure. And my question was, did Bo Nix, or has Bo Nix almost erased the negative downside of the Russell Wilson era, or healed the Broncos and the fan base from that same secular feeling we had felt at the end of Russell Wilson, at the end of all these other previous quarterbacks? Has that already happened? Has Bo Nix saved the Broncos from lingering impacts of that signing and that inevitable mistake?
I think he started to. I think it was a big step. And, I think there's a couple of things to that. One, people were more patient with him. He's a rookie. You're going to be more patient. But imagine if, you pull the plug 4 games in and on that, experiment too. Would have been the same kind of disaster. So I think it has. I think if he has another good year and doesn't have the sophomore slump,
especially because the dead cap continues to lessen and we're free of it. And
if they have a good year this year, if they're a playoff team again this year, you know, it's the modern sports world. There's so much stuff happening. We move on from things so quickly. You know, I always use this example, like Scott Norwood missing the kick in Buffalo. Like, he was a pariah in that town for like a decade.
Yeah.
People just move on from that stuff now. We're on to what's the next thing?
Right.
You know, people aren't saddled with
knocking his mailbox over.
Right. People aren't, maybe in Buffalo they would, because there's not as much going on. But you know what I'm saying? Like, by and large, when somebody's chokes in a big moment, it's not as big as it used to be. And I think that's kind of the same thing here. The Broncos, if they move on, if they're a playoff team, that just becomes this anecdotal piece of their history. We all make fun of it. We all laugh about it and we move on. So it's all how they do this year. But I do think, I mean, what they've done with the team, what he's shown his first year, Sean Payton's a guy who clearly knows how to win. I do think they're on a good track, and I think there's reason to be excited.
And that's the devil's advocate that I would almost give myself in asking the question I just asked you, is has Bo Nix saved the Broncos from the pain and the lingering impact of that mistake in terms of assigning an extension with Russell Wilson? But in theory, you could attribute a lion's share of the credit to Sean Payton, who was the one who said, I want to cut this guy, even if it means doing this, and I'm going to call my shot on the 6th quarterback taken in the draft, still in the first round, and then I'm going to turn him into a winner. And it's in a 1-year sample size thus far has happened. So there is maybe an argument to be made that, like, yeah, you could say Bo Nix has helped save them from the lingering aspect of that mistake, but you could also make a similar argument for Sean Payton, I suppose.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. The guy who came in and rectified that situation, right? Now, it's a painful way to rectify it. I don't think it was the right way. I think you've been better off to try to make it work, but whatever. He came in and rectified it, or at least it appears so. One other thing's made it easier to heal. Russ goes to Pittsburgh. They go 10-7. They lose in the same round as the Broncos.
Right.
If they go on a playoff run.
Oh, if they were playing in an AFC championship game, it was like them in Kansas City or something. Oh.
And now he's bouncing around, and now he's to the Giants. It's like, you know, the ex-girlfriend who, you know, keeps dating dirtbags. You're like, yeah, okay. All of a sudden she's dating a millionaire. It's a little bit of a different story.
Well, Russ is going to have another opportunity in Big
He ain't
Blue.
going to win it. He ain't going to win in New York.
I think it's going to be worse than Pittsburgh. That's for sure.
Agreed.
And I had said, as soon as that trade went down and that was announced, I was like, I don't think Russell Wilson is fully aware and prepared for what is going to come from that fan base, and more specifically, that media market when they don't do well.
Agreed. And listen, I like Russell Wilson a lot. I think he's a really good guy, right? Like, you don't win the Walter Payton Man of the Year award if you're not somebody who does things the right way. He is the least self-aware athlete I've ever come across in my life. And I think that's what rubbed people the wrong way here. Here, they just turn on you in kind of we're overly nice.
Yeah, it's more patty cake.
They're going to turn on him in an ugly way in New York. Yeah. If they start off in New York the way he started off here, that's going to be must-see TV. Talk about get your popcorn ready.
Yep.
Oh, my goodness. That'll be not in a nice way, but that'll be must-see TV.
Well, I'm here for all of it. I can't wait to see it. And I can't wait to see it from afar, which has been nice because I kind of like what the Broncos have going on here with Sean Payton and Bo Nix and the things they got going on defensively. So, James, thank you so much for putting this list together, for helping us, orchestrate these walks down memory lane, and for joining me for this one, which feels like there was no one closer to the heart of this one than perhaps you or the This Is Not a Drill man himself, Zach By. So thank you for hanging out with me today.
I appreciate you having me. I feel like I got some closure.
Yes.
Feels good.
That was good.
Feels
that was good. I feel a little bit lifted myself. So thank you for joining me. Thank you all for following along with us. Give us a follow on social media at DEN Sports 1043. Check out our YouTube channel, like and subscribe, and we will catch you tomorrow for a special edition rundown episode on the road. Happy home opening day at Coors Field. So can't wait to catch up with you then.